Thank you for joining us. The webinar will begin shortly. If you have questions, please use the Q&A section and we will try to answer your questions in the order we receive them. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's episode of Alchemizing HR, Navigating What's Next. Our topic, navigating salary and rewards benchmarking in high-stakes markets. For those of you who are new to our community of learning, welcome. We're so happy to have you. And for those of you who are returning, it's wonderful to see you again. Before we kick off today's session, I'd like to take a moment to shine a spotlight on our sponsor, Ethico, champions in empowering the ethics and compliance in HR industries for over 25 years. With their people-focused governance, risk, and compliance solutions, Ethico transforms the conventional product-focused landscape by providing time-saving automation and solutions tailored specifically to HR practitioners like us. This approach delivers greater clarity to ensure workplace safety, making Ethico a true partner in elevating compliance and ethics. For those looking to empower their teams and safeguard their people, Ethico stands ready to help. So let's now dive into today's session. For those of you who I haven't met, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Clarissa Peterson. I'll be your host. My background is I'm a former chief HR and ethics officer, and I've had the privilege of working on every continent on the planet, with the exception of Antarctica. And at this point, I don't know, I may make it there one day. Never say never. I'm also the proud holder of the GPHR, the SPHR, and the leading professional in ethics and compliance certifications, and a former chair of the board of directors of HRCI. Today, I'm president and CEO and an executive coach with Ohana HR. Our organization works to transform leaders one person at a time. Just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, don't forget to tell us where you're connecting from. You know, we know you get up early and stay up late to learn with us here at HRCI, and for that, we are so grateful. Go ahead and put your location in the chat so I can share it with our speakers a little later. Also, we want to make sure that Alchemizing HR is accessible to all, so we have a closed captioning service. If that's not a service you require, just click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen for additional information. Now on to introducing today's amazing speakers. Chris Danks is the CEO and founder of the Leadership Collective, and Chris has over 20 years of experience helping organizations, including Verizon Business, Vodafone, Honeywell, and tech startups expand globally. Chris's expertise lies in talent attraction, management, and navigating the complexities of international business expansion. Stephen Dooley. Stephen is the founder of Roamer, a future of work company that enables employers to cut travel spend by paying employees instead of hotels. Stephen spent 3.5 years researching digital platform adoption and trust building as part of his PhD candidacy. Having been a program director of both business and computing faculties, he's talks lend to root themselves in data and a deeper societal and economic rationale. Stephen is a thought leader on the future of work and emerging trends. Nikki Walsh is a seasoned HR executive with over 3 decades of expertise in delivering global employee benefits and retention strategies to thriving fast growth companies in the SME community. Her impressive track record includes collaborations with industry giants like LinkedIn, GenBrand, Fitbit, Nutanix, Palo Alto Networks, and Cohesity, amongst others. Nikki co-founded a successful global HR business, which she later sold to private equity before founding Explore HR. Beyond her business acumen, Nikki is deeply passionate about fostering employee engagement and is widely respected for generously sharing insights, know-how, and practical solutions to navigate HR challenges. So without further delay, it gives me great honor to introduce today's speakers, Chris Danks, Stephen Dooley, and Nikki Walsh. Chris, take it away.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Clarissa. So hello and welcome everyone from a very hot and sunny Austria today. My name is Chris Danks and I'm the founder of the Leadership Collective. I'm very excited to be here again today for what is now our 5th webinar alongside HRCI. So just a little bit about the Leadership Collective. So our goal as a strategic HRCI partner is to provide regular content and insights on some of the most pressing issues that HR professionals have whilst enabling you to gain the relevant credits with HRCI. Our main aim is to be the primary resource that you call upon as HR professionals to support and help you break through barriers, preventing you from realizing your goals. We are a community of HR professionals and leaders, and our community offers 4 ways to help you as a leader. So we offer peer-to-peer events. We have a WhatsApp and a Slack channel to help you as HR professionals collaborate, which you'll find a link in the chat window throughout the presentation and also in the resources. We offer a variety of content on a host of issues to help you solve your HR-related challenges on a daily basis. We also provide advisory services to support you in solving a variety of HR challenges and offer global recruitment solutions across what is now 66 countries, from Mexico to China to Germany and all over the world, all delivered by our in-country recruitment experts. So let me tell you a little bit about the agenda for today. So having worked with many HR leaders and professionals myself, I'm sure many of you will agree that this topic is a very pressing one today. We do have a lot to get through. So I'll just give you a quick summary now. So Nikki is going to look at practical ways to align your reward strategy with your business goals, and will also help guide you through a robust, practical and pragmatic methodology when it comes to developing a rewards strategy that's fit for these changing times. So Nikki's also going to discuss how to integrate a local offering with a global strategy and talk about the legal minimum requirements for rewards versus the norms and what you need to do to be credible and attractive in new markets. Nikki will then offer her views on what's trending at the moment before handing over to Stephen, who will offer insights into navigating the future of work, outlining different models of working and how this is related to different types of thinking and your future reward strategy, with a particular focus on the generational considerations and how to take this into account when creating your own strategy to engage and retain your employee base. So just before I hand over, I want to share with you that we have 20 spots at the moment available for a rewards masterclass workshop that Nikki and Stephen have very kindly agreed to run for HRCI certification holders and others free of charge in September. So these dates will be finalised shortly, but register your interest using the QR code that should be on your screen now and the link in the resources if you want to connect later or apply to be on the session later into this event. The link is in the resources. The aim of this particular event is to offer coaching and guidance relating to your reward strategy in a more kind of intimate setting. So feel free to sign up if it's something of interest. So just before we get started, we wanted to just run one poll again today to allow plenty of time for insights from Nikki and from Stephen. So it's a very simple question today. How many of you have experienced challenges gathering relevant data, specifically in relation to salary and benefits benchmarking, either because the data isn't available in the country that you're looking at or the region as a whole, or maybe the data is unreliable or outdated? So you should see 4 options on your screen now. I'll give it a moment for you guys to make your selection. I would imagine this might be quite high on the top answers, but let's see what happens. We'll just give it a couple more moments. So 61% of you have had some issues with patchy information. 18% have had major difficulties. So as I guess we might have expected, we know that this is a core topic that comes up very often from many HR professionals and leaders. So it's not of a great surprise. So hopefully Nikki and Stephen can offer you plenty of insights today to help solve some of these challenges. So without further ado, Nikki, I shall hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So without further ado, I shall launch straight in. So in designing a compensation package, it's really essential to understand where the company sees itself right now. And that then leads into the question around what it is that you need to compete against your peer companies. So for those of you that might be in a startup mode, it's important to know that a small company or a company in startup is just not simply able to compete with the bigger players, because there are some real key considerations to take into account. First and not least is the budgetary constraints. This means thinking about the sustainability of offering significantly high packages at the outset. So you need to therefore think about being creative and develop reward packages that incentivize and develop loyalty. And these are going to be things like long-term incentive schemes, such as bonus plans and share schemes. Thinking about career development, so structured programs for individuals that are coming into your organization. So, at startup, those will be minimal, but as the company grows, it's thinking about what what the progression plan is going to be for your employees. And in tandem with that, looking at learning opportunities. And there are all sorts of themes that you want to attach towards length of service. What you really want to see is you want employees staying with you for a longer term because you want to see results from that upfront investment. So you've got budgetary constraints there. Then the other thing you need to think about is economies of scale, because as a small company, many of the employee benefits, the traditional employee benefits, which we'll talk about later, they come with headcount restrictions. So a business that has something like 75 employees has way more options available to it than a company with less than 10 employees. And the other thing that we're going to touch on, and there'll be a theme throughout this presentation, is around international. So thinking about location. So can the business support remote working? As you may be established in your in the founding country of the business, but you may then be looking to set up elsewhere in another location, and in that location you would be considered to be a startup. And with that startup consideration, the questions you need to be asking yourself is, can the business support remote working? It requires a different infrastructure, such as payroll, taxes, compliance, reporting, and understanding of in-country legislation and what the norms are, and really getting a good understanding of what the investment is required to support that. And on that latter point, that it's a big topic, but don't let that, don't be put off by that, because there are specialists out there that can help you navigate that path. When you come to being a mid-sized company, this is when you're on the upward trajectory and you're building your retention strategies. So all of the same things apply with a small company, a startup company, but at mid-sized stage, this is where the company will have introduced other initiatives that include things like succession planning, wellness and support packages, utilizing all of those wonderful apps that are coming out, and maximizing the built-in module to some of the risk insurance products that you might have in place. So invariably, there are usually some gems tucked away in these big policies that you might have that you may not be aware of, things like employee assistance programs. At mid-size, you might also have things like community groups within the organization, and you will be looking at enhanced family-friendly policies and enhanced time off provisions. And by the time you've become a large company, this is where you've got opportunities such as job swaps, international assignment opportunities. You look at sabbaticals and time off provisions, but you're also thinking about things like off-the-job training support. you've possibly got learning spending accounts for your employees, and you've got a host of health and wellness programs. But with all of those size companies, all of them have the same considerations at the outset, which is looking at your budget, the company and employee demographics, and the company's reward philosophy. Next slide, please. So this title, The Needle in the Haystack. So it's interesting because there's not a science in terms of obtaining benchmark data, but there is a methodology to it. So key, first and foremost, I would say, is leveraging your networks. We all have a network, and it's amazing what you can find within it. So what you should be doing is working your peer network, your HR colleagues in all other organizations, leveraging your recruiter networks because they're really important. And by this, I mean that, you know, these contacts, your networks, they should not be tapped into only and when you have a recruitment need. Then you want to do things like looking at the professional networking groups. So your employees, you know, in the professions that they're in, they can tap into resources within their own networks and, you know, feed back to you in the same way that in, you know, having an employee referral program, employees can feed back to you. Past applicants is actually quite a good one in that don't forget to tap into candidates that may not have been successful. There's a reason that they came to you to apply for a position. They may not have been successful, but in the same way that they would want feedback from you on why that is, it's important to actually ask them for feedback. What was it that attracted them in the first place? And, you know, talk to them about what may have made it that much better. And then, of course, not forgetting the subscription to data providers. So there are the companies that provide data. Maybe you have to subscribe to get that data, or you might have to pay for one-off benchmarking studies, but you've got the likes of Mercer that offer that service. And I've referenced in here going global because that's actually quite important. And what I wanted to share with you that about both where benchmarking comes into play and networking is that there are many of you, I'm sure, within the audience that can relate to this. I can't tell you how many times someone has come to me and has said, our CEO has just come back from a business trip. They've been talking to various people, they've been out there networking, and they've decided that they want to hire someone in Italy or Thailand or somewhere that's not in the you know, the home country. And that's what the result of obviously networking, and the business, the CEO has decided that this particular individual has something that they want to bring into the business. And that means you've got to ask some questions of the business about how that hire actually happens. So it's, you know, where do we need the position to be located? Is it in Italy or Thailand, or could it be somewhere more closer to the existing business? Does it need to be office or facility based? Can it be remote? And if it can be remote, then does it have to be in country? Can it be anywhere else in country or close by? And if it can be somewhere else, what are those resources that you need in order to explore it further? Next slide, please. So what is it that you're benchmarking? And here I've made a suggestion. There are three types of benchmarking at the outset. When I talk about high level, this is when the business wants to know what is it going to cost to recruit a new position. And it could be a new position within the existing in-country business or a new position in a very new location. But they want a rough and ready guide in order before any of that deeper analysis begins. So it's understanding what the compensation package might look like. What are the local taxes and considerations? Are there any mandatory considerations that we need to take into account? And are they going to actually cost us money to put into play? And once you get into your recruitment campaign, this is when you really want to go into a deeper dive. This is about exploring more accurate data. And as I talked about just a moment ago, about you've utilized some of your network and got some feedback on what a typical salary might be for a position that you're recruiting for, but you can reach out to your independent HR consultants, talk to your recruitment consultants, and importantly then, this is when some of the salary benchmark data providers will come into play into their own. But what they will need from you are things like understanding the company, size of the company, what's the turnover of the company, how many employees do you have, what is the role, and not just the job title, it's more than that, it's what is the actual role that you're looking to recruit for. And something else I want to touch on just from a global perspective here is that when you are doing salary benchmarking and you've paid for some data or you've collated some data, if you are looking to hire in a country that is not the country in which you are operating currently, then obviously the salary data that you're going to get back is going to be vastly different typically than what you are used to seeing. So a French sales engineer, that salary is going to look very different to a sales engineer in Chicago, for example. And when you're looking at somebody in France, as again, using that as my example, there are things to take into consideration like collective bargaining agreements. Those form the employment framework in France as it happens, but there are CBAs that apply in all manner of countries, particularly throughout Europe. But these CBAs actually have a very a minimum platform in which the company has to operate in terms of giving compensation and benefits to employees. So that will look like having a minimum salary to pay, but also things like in France, it just so happens that the mandatory minimum you need to provide for a Syntec CBA is health insurance and medical insurance. They may be at a base level, but it's important that you understand they are a mandatory requirement. So as part of your recruitment campaign, if you are going to advertise what the benefits are that the company are giving, know that just advertising medical and life insurance is not necessarily going to be giving pulling candidates to you unless you're offering enhanced provision. And that's where your HR consultants and your recruitment consultants come into play in telling you what are the local norms in country. And in this slide, we talk also about retention. So with this, this is looking at what is consistently reviewing what's happening within the organisation and particularly what feedback you're getting from employees. So what you're looking at is what's working and what's not. You need to be surveying your employees and understanding what rewards are welcome and which are just, well, simply not being used. Targeting your HR spend on the areas with the greatest impact, and then reviewing what other companies are doing. And again, this feeds back to the whole networking scenario. I also here just want to touch on employee benefits in a global scenario. So again, when we're talking about what is it that you're benchmarking, you are looking at employee benefits, and you want to consider that not one size fits all. When you're looking at a global platform, one size does not necessarily fit all in all areas. In some, perhaps, but there are things you, as I've already alluded to, things like CBAs that you need to take into account. But importantly, there are things to consider like statutory, mandatory, supplemental benefits, and what is considered the norm. So know that your statutory benefits are the things that are usually typically funded by social security contributions. They are usually your very base level offering, and more often than not, they're insufficient to consider as an employee benefit. In most cases, you'll be looking to supplement that with enhanced provision. Then you will have things like mandatory provisions, and I've just used that French example where, you have to provide health insurance and life insurance in France, but turning to the supplemental provision, you will want to offer something enhancement to that provision, but also importantly, looking at what is considered the norm. So the norm may be an enhancement. It might actually be more than you were actually expecting to offer. So it's important to understand, what does that really look like? And in a similar vein, you want to think about, when I say not one size fits all, so in terms of looking at things like maternity provisions. So we know at one stage it was a hot trend to have unlimited vacation. And now it seems that there is a trend developing towards looking at policies that span the globe. And so maternity, paternity might be one of those such areas that I'm seeing springing up. But know that you really have to do some research here around understanding that what the maternity provision is in Spain may be vastly different to what that maternity provision is in Mexico. And if you're going to apply a policy that it goes across the board, in some countries, that enhancement that you think you're offering is not an enhancement at all. And you may have some, disgruntled employees, if you like, if you don't get it right. So I want to say that, there are lots of buzzwords and trends that are going, but the key thing is not losing sight of the goal of making your company unique. Traditional benefits will always remain on the radar in my view, but it's looking at how to make your business stand out and more attractive to employees. Next slide, please. And here I just wanted to touch on things that are trending at present. So as I mentioned, things like group insurance, those insured products such as life insurance, health insurance, disability, they are still very much on the radar. Globally, I would say healthcare providers, in-country solutions that, social security provision, they are crumbling. They're all overburdened, they're all overstretched, and therefore things like having, private health insurance is still very much sought after by most of the population. Retirement saving vehicles, this is a key one, but and what's happening again globally is that there's not enough savings in many countries by the working population. They reach retirement and find that they have insufficient funds, and they certainly don't have enough to live on when it comes to whatever they had saved through their social security provision. And so this is where many countries are looking to employers to push through the message that retirement savings is very important. And that's why the initiatives are things like auto-enrollment that have been introduced in various countries. Then we have things like enhanced family-friendly policies, flexible working practices. They're all geared towards, the work-life balance of employees. Remote working policies, this is something that Steve will touch on in his session. Employee wellness initiatives, we all know. I've talked about app-based initiatives. There are many, many apps out there, all of which look at the health and welfare of employees. Then we've got employee education and development, career development. And then finally, the corporate social responsibility opportunities. So that's about what's becoming quite hot is companies supporting charitable aims of individuals and indeed the companies themselves. And it's not just about handing money over and being a sponsor to a charity. It's about enabling employees the opportunity to take time out to support those charities. So that's me. I shall now hand back over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Lots of good insights. So I particularly like the bit around the methodology, because I think I know gathering data in different countries is a real challenge. In some countries, the data's often, not always up to date, and in other countries, the data alone doesn't exist. So I think the core methodology is like a really important component. It's something that we get that comes up in our community an awful lot as a topic. So yeah, I think think it's really interesting, and look forward to doing the workshop with you next month and going into a little bit more detail. So thanks very much
Absolutely.
for that.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I'll hand over to you now, Stephen.
Super. Thanks so much, Chris. And just from the top, it's amazing to see all the different locations coming through in the chat there. So as someone building a company around travel and on unlocking the globe, it's really cool to see that the audience is tuning in from everywhere. But I suppose just before I jump in, I kind of want to acknowledge the bias in my perspective up front. So first and foremost, Romer, we typically sell and discuss our product and strategy with technology companies primarily, or else companies that are in slightly less tech-centric businesses that are transitioning to try and use technology as their means of competing. So that's one layer of my context. And I suppose the other one is, on the spectrum of where we sit now versus the future, I definitely tilt more towards that friendliness towards remote model. That's a personal belief. It's kind of one that we're benchmarking the business on. So a quick one-liner on what we do is, we're a corporate travel accommodation platform, and we help companies save money by paying their employees instead of hotels. So functionally, what that would mean is, let's say you're a company and you've got someone in Dublin and you need them to get out to San Francisco for a project for 1 month. That would typically cost the company currently $10,000 on hotel bills. But with Romer, what we're suggesting is a colleague or someone in the network in that city could host them. They would earn 30% of that hotel cost, so $3,000. The traveling employee also earns $3,000, and then the company saves $4,000. So my perspective on that is that we're transitioning towards a more distributed world than we currently are living in, and I think borders will be unlocked as part of that. Next slide, please, if that's good. I think the reason we're here is because of two key things that I kind of want to ingrain in you guys here, and my talk is more around changing a mindset. So you may come away with more questions than answers here, but two things that I want to set in the scene is, we've spoken to hundreds of companies at this point, and at the top table in big tech companies like Stripe, Google, Meta, and all of the big logos that you're accustomed to seeing there, as well as mid-size SMB companies. What was really interesting is when we were doing our customer discovery, we asked them, what are your challenges in the future of work? They had 50 different challenges, but every single conversation, there was two common themes. So that's to set the context for you guys. One is that attracting and retaining talent is extremely difficult. Nuances within that. We're now in a global talent market, which is great from a supply perspective. But now, as a company, you're competing with every other company in the world. So you need to really refine your talent brand so that you stand out in that global market. The second one then is in-person time was a real challenge for everyone. And that depended on where you are on the spectrum of working model, which we'll look at in a second. But if you're a company that wanted people to come into the office, there's pushback there on that type of an in-person time that you're pushing for. And also, if you're a fully distributed company, fully remote company, that's great for a number of reasons, but there's also some drawbacks around engagement and collaboration. So the desire for those companies to bring people together was more prohibited by cost. The more distributed you become, the more expensive that is to bring people together. The other context is, since the dawn of time, HR leaders and HR conversation has been about getting a seat at the table, right? Because of what's happened in the last few years, finally a light has been shone on your skill and your expertise to drive business outcomes. And it's absolutely paramount. If you want to keep that voice in the room, you need to be thinking differently than you ever had before. You need to think about, how do I drive outcomes for the business as opposed to specifically for my function if you want to retain that seat. So I'm just going to slide next to talk about some of the overviews then on the overview of a few of the talking points that we have. So we talked about data from the outset as a challenge for you guys. Some of the places I looked to really inform our thinking, to cut through the noise that you see on social media, is very polarized views on the way that we work and future of work and RTO mandates and no, we should do it this way. Some really strong, the numbers don't lie, folks that I follow would be an example like Nick Bloom, who's researching out of Stanford. You've got Rob Sado and the team at Flex Index. They publish a quarterly report that just gives you a real temperature check on how things actually are. Other examples might be Workplace Analytics or Microsoft's Workplace Trends reports. We're going to look in a second at working models and a definition of them. Some future of work stats so that you can take away, I suppose, some bullets when you're trying to influence those conversations and those projects to get over the line internally. So just a quick highlight on some of the things that I've seen recently and a temperature check. Work from home has now settled at about 25% of working days. That's massive because that includes in that data set all companies in the US. So that includes companies that are fully remote and also ones that have total in-office time. The next thing is work from home has reduced quit rates by 35%. So again, that's Nick Bloom and the team at Stanford. The really important statistic that I've looked at over the last 2 years is occupancy rates in office space, because you see this conversation on RTO and CEOs want people back in the office. The best way to cut through the noise is look at the occupancy rates. They've been stable for about 2 years now at about 50%. The last piece, when we talk about those different models, is productivity and revenue. Companies that have a mandated time in the office have seen revenue growth over the last year of 5%. Companies that have no mandated time in the office, even if they have office space that they're using, but there's no mandated time, has seen revenue growth of 22%. So there is a huge outperformance of companies that are embracing employee choice over mandates. I'm going to talk a little bit about difference in generations at the work, but what I want you to think about is, I want to give you a mindset shift to take away, and that's to start thinking about the consumer markets and the changes in broader societal trends, and how you can start designing your strategies for rewards to attract that type of talent. I'll give you a list of some of those as well too. So next slide, please. And we're just going to look at, I've shared these resources for you to dive deeper here, but this is really just a high level definition of what the actual working models are now. The one on the left here is from GitLab. It was actually published in about 2021, and the one on the right is from Flex Index. So ultimately what we're illustrating here is, whether you're hybrid, whether you're remote, there's variations of that type of an approach, and that has to filter all the way down through your operations and how you execute, but also your rewards should be tied to that. Many of you in the company that you're working with will have defined and they'll decide it, but it's very important that you keep abreast of the other strategies that businesses are putting in place and how their rewards are tied to that, because ultimately you're competing for this type of talent. Okay, so if you look on the GitLab one here, you have things from all remote to remote allowed, remote only, remote first. There's variations of that definition in the one remote space. I prefer to look at Flex Index's definition. It's a little bit simpler. They break it down into fully flexible companies, structured hybrid, or full-time in office. One key differentiation on fully flexible is you can have fully remote as fully flexible, but also employee's choice. So that might actually mean that there's a bunch of people coming into the office regularly, but it's the autonomy that they've been given. We've seen that outperform revenue as a result. Again, structured hybrid changes based on whether you have a minimum requirement of a number of days. You might have specific anchor days that you're now seeing as well. So just another data point there is the average number of days being spent in the office across the US is 2.49 days. Again, that's huge because it includes folks who are fully in office all the time. So next slide, please. I'm going to give you a few things that you already know. You've already understood. Sorry, just next slide there if we could, folks. Things that you think about that I want you to think about is the generations that exist in the workforce. Just a high level thing, one or two that you'll already understand about them. They care more about autonomy and purpose than they do about salary. There's various studies on this to illustrate it, and I've seen the numbers saying anywhere from 50% to 78% of people would change jobs or quit a job pursuing autonomy and flexibility on location. So they're willing to take a salary cut in pursuit of that location flexibility. I've seen the study also say that the salary cut that they'd be willing to accept is anywhere from 5 to 10%. So they really, really value that autonomy. The next thing is, we know that the next workforce, the younger crew in the workforce are the most technologically literate than they ever have been before. They're digital natives. That doesn't need to be said, but it should be something you think about in terms of how you structure your own rewards and internal, maybe LMS projects. The last 2 points there are kind of tied together, and I'll be touching on them on the next slide. So if we can jump on. What I want you to do is I want you to start thinking about, what can I look at in the broader societal context? What's changing about the world in maybe consumer markets? How can I leverage the understanding of those changes such that we design a better strategy that's more relevant for that type of person? So some really high level pieces would be, technology is the conduit for everything. I want to give you an anecdotal story. I live in a fairly rural part of Ireland. I've got some younger cousins who live in Dublin. They've only lived in Dublin, in the big city. A couple of years ago, they came down to where we live to spend the week holidaying down in the quiet part of the country. And I went down the second day they were there, and I started talking to my 14-year-old cousin, and I said, "What did you get up to yesterday?" And he turned around and said to me, "I was hanging out with my friends." That blew me away, because I was thinking, who the hell do you know in this part of the world? And I said that to him. And his response never made me feel so old, even though there was only 10 years between us or so. He turned around and he said he was hanging out with his friends on Discord. Now that made me feel like a dinosaur. To those not familiar with Discord, they tend to turn it on when they're gaming and they interact that way. But what it means is their native status for hanging out has now become a digital first medium. So one other piece as well that we see in the sort of in their consumer habits is this instant feedback loop, right? It's the TikTok generation, it's the dopamine fiends. You know, Instagram is a constant feedback loop. As soon as you push something out on your socials, you have a metric for that feedback and how well it's received, whether that's like or absence of likes. So just want to give you a story that we heard about on that intermediate short-term view as well. So these kind of employees tend to look more short-term, their tenure is much shorter, and as a result, rewards being adapted to that should be more successful with this group. So I'll give you a story from a CPO I spoke to this week of a 4,000 person organization. They decided after surveying about 350 of their Gen Z staff that they would no longer include those employee share options, and instead they would take the monetary value and give them a lift in their salary as a result. They did that. They then had pitchforks, and the committee for the next gen voice was kind of beaten down the hatches to say, why didn't we get brought into that decision? We didn't have a voice in the room. Now ultimately they realized that in time they had done that research and that survey. But it tells us two things. It tells us that they want to constantly be involved in the conversation. They want this constant feedback loop, but also there's a shorter term thinking there. So next slide, please. So what I take away from this, and you can read these surveys in the resources yourselves a little bit deeper, is that flexibility is key. And that's both in terms of the rewards you provide, but also in the mindset of the organization. So if you look at some of these high level pieces here, study done by Gable, 81% of employees say flexibility is very important, but only 30% say that seeing their team members in person is important. Now the Gen Z group in the workforce don't really know themselves what they want, right? They're pushing for this autonomy and flexibility on location, but also when surveyed by Microsoft to say who wants to be meeting their colleagues in person, they're the highest cohort. They want to come into the office to meet managers so that they can network, build their own career, have that transfer of knowledge as well. If we look on the next slide as well, we're looking at flexibility in terms of the amount of companies and where those companies are that are more embracing those models. So this is again from Flex Index. You'll have access to these reports in the resources, and I don't want to read it for you here, but I just want to show you a high level that 79% of tech firms are now fully flexible. And the majority of them are leading with an employee's choice policy on where their staff can locate. And you have all these EOR models that are popping up and the competition in that market as a result, but it just really shows you where the trend is. So percentage of US companies that are offering flexibility is 69% and fully in office is 31%. Why that's amazing to me is some companies by default of their business model have to be an in-person type of organization. So to see that that's the level we're at is incredible. So we can skip on again. There's a couple of industries that I just want to highlight to you as who are embracing this more. The number one is technology. Next slide, please. The number one is technology. 97% of those companies are embracing location flexibility. Insurance are after that. What's also interesting is if we look at the least flexible industries, the second is education, but still only 51% of those are companies that are full-time in office, which shows the spectrum here. So I want to talk about rewards and generations on the next slide real quickly. So these are just things that I'm seeing trending and from the conversations we have with those leaders in these companies. The mindset has shifted from this universally applicable one-size-fits-all benefit structure to generationally specific, and even a subsection of that we're now seeing is that location and locally specific versus global. So this should stem from that desire for autonomy and desire for flexibility and choice. The next thing as well, as I've already touched it, is location flexibility beats salary. So they're looking for that autonomy and they're willing to take a reduction in salary as a result. Some places that you guys could even look to for how do we think about this might be looking at companies that are offering these flexible choice platforms like Quota, CoverFlex, Thanks Ben. There'll be a bunch of others out there. You could maybe join the newsletter of these companies as well because they tend to share data points themselves. One of the other obvious ones that the conversation tends to lead to is the rise of the employer of record. So they're the new standard bearers for how benefits and rewards are being done. The last piece, the most low-hanging fruit that I would see as a change that you could make, if you're a company that has decided we're going to do hybrid work, you've taken away one of the best parts of remote and distributed work, and that's the location independence. So the most common thing we're seeing companies supplement that decision with is 30-day work from abroad and 60-day work from abroad policies. it's almost a free rollout for you to be able to enable those team members to work from a different location. If you've bound them to a city, you've taken away some of the best parts, and that's a really obvious one. There's a couple of other ideas that I've seen out there as well. So things like meetup budgets, co-working and together days, and putting some spend behind that. There's also travel stipends. This is quite justifiable as a distributed team because it's a business spend, but it's also kind of enabling really amazing life experiences for your individuals and your team. So I want to leave you with two low-cost, high-impact ideas. So if we go on to the next slide, the first idea is this concept of friendship. So just if we jump onto the next slide there, folks, thank you. This has existed in quite a while, but it's attacking two main challenges in business. We have the age out happening with knowledge transfer leaving the company. We have shorter tenures with the folks that are in our teams. So actually those in the older generation within the workforce have probably been in our company for the longest, and therefore when they leave, they're going to take the most knowledge with them. At the same time, we have this highly digitally competent group that are entering the workforce, but who also are striving to have that network and have that purpose of work felt and the feeling of making impact at work. AI is the buzzword and the trend, and we're trying to think about how we upskill and how we bring that into our workforce. 13, 14, and 15-year-olds are using AI at this point. Probably, if you were to throw two people from different age brackets, the younger they are, the quicker they tend to adopt to these new technologies. So a very simple idea might be to use an educational tool on how we as the younger generation have adopted these tools, and that can be part of creating those links between the older group and the younger group, to have that knowledge transfer, to have that networking, to have that team cohesion and togetherness, but also to drive this feeling within that younger demographic of I have a purpose in this organization. The next one as well will be adopt a startup as a potential idea. So Gen Zs tend to be more in the consumer markets, more conscious around environmental challenges and give back and conscious consumerism. They also, from the CPOs that we've talked about, tend to have slightly less of an understanding perhaps of business from a holistic perspective and higher up the food chain than maybe predecessors had. One way that you could upskill on both sides would be this concept of adopt a startup. So you give them some voluntary days that actually exist in an awful lot of policies at the moment, but maybe if you give them that as part of a project to help a young budding company, they start to learn tangible skills that they can take back while also feeling that voluntary piece. So I'm just conscious on the end of time there. We've got some resources linked in the next slide for anybody to check back. And I would encourage you all to connect with me on LinkedIn and keep the dialogue going. I don't have all the answers, but I love hearing all the questions so that we can start thinking about that as well too. So I'll throw it back to you. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Yep, some really good insights there, and you'll see on the screen now as well. We popped it up at the beginning, but for those that missed it, we've got the masterclass with Nikki and Stephen in September with dates to be confirmed. So we do have limited spots on that, I will mention. So come and sign up if you're interested in doing a bit of a deeper dive in some of the topics that we've covered today. So so thank you, Stephen and Nikki. Clarissa, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris, Stephen, and Nikki. What an amazing presentation. So much wonderful information. Thank you so much. As I said earlier, including the two of you, we know our participants get up early and stay up late with us to learn at HRCI. So I'd like to just acknowledge that we have HR professionals from all over the US, but also in other parts of the world, which include Canada, Spain, Vietnam, the Netherlands, Kenya, Saudi Arabia, Cameroon, the Bahamas, Dubai, Armenia, India, Nigeria, Kazakhstan, Nevis, Rwanda, Nepal, Uganda, Costa Rica, Tanzania, Ghana, Egypt, Doha, Australia, and the US Virgin Islands. If I missed your country, please go ahead and put it in the chat. Lots of great questions and perspectives. So I want to start with you because you gave us a list of amazing benefits that we need to think about as employers as we are employing people cross-border. Could you talk to us a little bit about some of the benefits that are not statutory, but are more cultural? Because you made a great point that it's not a one size fits all. Every country has its own statutory package. But what about some of those benefits that may be more cultural that employees expect, but as employers who are offshore, we may not be aware of?
Oh, I'm sorry, Clarissa, was that question directed at me?
That's to you, Nikki. Yes.
Okay, so there will be things like voucher schemes. So, for example, things like meal vouchers. Those are, they are small ticket items, but actually very important because they are just expected. It's if you don't offer it, why not? Do you not know that this is it's not mandatory, but it's expected. It comes as part and parcel of an employee's package, for example. So most certainly that is one that I see most often. And it's also probably one of the things that can be more tricky to administer if you don't have contacts within a company to being able to navigate how how the software works. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nikki. Stephen, a question for you. I thought it was so interesting that you talked about this new approach to talent, which is more global. But I know back in the day when I was leading global organizations, it was very hard to transfer talent globally because of some of the taxation issues that if you were certainly in the US, I think it was called a 173-day rule. It was some sort of rule that if you had an expat in a country over a certain amount of days, you would now be taxed based on the taxation or revenue scheme of the home country. How is taxation now being considered when we're now looking at talent globally? Have those regulations relaxed? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, I suppose disclaimer, this is not tax advice from the outset, but
no tax advice.
No, I'm being tongue in cheek there, but what we thought when we started Romer, right? We thought what we do is we enable people to move and spend time working in different locations without paying for it, right? In terms of the accommodation costs. A big part of what we thought we'd have to do is have this in-house team who are total tax experts, fully understood every rule in every country in the world. And look, we have added board members who are head of global mobility in KPMG and investors in that regard to bring the skills around us. But what we then found within a year, the market actually dictated that themselves, right? So more so specifically in technology, the standardizations of those policies have just hit, right? So 30-day work from anywhere policy, 60-day work from anywhere. I've seen 180 days. So there's a spectrum of risk that companies are willing to start to accept within that, right? You see companies like Airbnb who are accepting it. I spoke to a company of 5,000 folks who are fully remote, and they just don't have any decision making that they put around that. Now, I think that's not necessarily what you should. I'm not advocating entirely for that. I'm just saying there's a spectrum that different folks take. 30 days tends to be the conservative. We feel that that's fully underneath any compliance levels, and we're happy with that. I think that's where we'll start, and I actually think regulation will begin to catch up. You see things like the digital nomad visas becoming a means for countries to attract talent. So there's going to be even a difference in how certain countries approach this. So it's a very complex piece. What we're starting to see is maybe some folks are outsourcing that to employer of records to handle. So that business model now has essentially cropped up as the way of if we outsource that to folks like Deal and Remote.com and GP and a bunch of others in the space, that's kind of a way that they're mitigating that risk internally. They're trying to enable that mobility, trying to enable folks across the boundaries and open the world up, because it's one of the best benefits of having that distributed workforce.
So exciting. What times we live in. Thank you for that. Nikki, I'm going to take this question over to you. This person says, when doing business across multiple countries, the differences in government provided benefits, medical, retirement, superannuation, etc., makes an apples to apples comparison of role value very difficult. How do you level the field so that you can look at the total compensation value of roles that fall across the globe?
So essentially, it's looking at you have your base level, which we know the social security provision. You have look at what the benchmark data shows us of the supplemental provision, and then really it comes down to understanding what does the company want to actually set out as an enhancement and seeing how that fits, because the reality is you have vacation entitlements, for example. In one country it might be 10 days mandatory minimum, but in other countries it might be 25 as a mandatory minimum. And if you wanted to offer an enhancement, I think really you have to, your country that has the 25-day provision would need to be enhanced slightly in order for them to feel that they're getting an enhancement. And then the lower countries, they are raised accordingly too. So they get an enhancement. It may not be at 25 days, but there needs to be the perception that actually they are being offered an enhanced package.
That's exactly right, Nikki. If I'm sitting in another country, I'm feeling that it's unfair that this other part of
Absolutely.
the world gets more. So you're saying it's not necessarily equal, but trying to find some equity or equivalency as best you can, so people feel that they're getting a
And
good deal.
I think also some of it is around the messaging. So the communication with employees about when they feel that he's getting more than me because my benefits are only statutory minimum of, as I say, could be 10 days. I want a slice of that pie, but the fact is I might only receive 10 days, but I also might get something else that an
Yeah.
employee in another country doesn't get. And I think sometimes that openness actually helps employees to understand why there
Yes.
are differences.
Yes.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that, Clarissa,
Please, Stephen. Yeah.
I think it's actually a very similar debate to universally applicable benefits or generationally specific benefits. You could take the same thing to say two different locations could have a similar piece. So what we've started to see is forward-thinking companies are no longer having this requirement in their vendor onboarding that says, can all of our workforce use this benefit? And we can't roll out anything unless everybody would use it the same way. But at the same time, you have younger folks in the workforce who don't really care about pensions right now. They also probably look at the company like, we're only going to be here 3 years. I'm not going to start thinking about this pension piece. They care more about gym memberships or care more about travel stipends or access to equipment and headphones. So companies that have cropped up solving that problem are companies that are giving employees the choice for what benefits they want to draw down. So like those cover flexes and Coda and some of those other platforms, you could take the same approach. Provided you hit the statutory minimums in every country that you're in, you could then have a certain budget that you would have on top for employee driven or employee choice based benefits. And that might be a real decent way to level the field if that's the goal.
Excellent. Stephen, Nikki, we're going to land it here. This was absolutely fascinating, so thought-provoking, and expanding our thinking beyond the talent that's in our respective countries. Talent is global. And now we're talking about mechanisms to make that happen. So on behalf of all my friends and colleagues on the call today, Stephen, Nikki, Chris, we are so grateful for your expertise and for sharing with us. I want to announce to everyone our new book is out, Alchemizing HR, Your Formula for the Next Era. It's a playbook that's going to be the guide to the HRCI professional development model and continue to invest in you as HR professionals. You can grab it on Amazon.com, and we're so excited to share it with you. Last but not least, here's today's recertification activity ID 675509, 675509. Remember, in order to continue to do the good work that Nikki and Stephen have reminded us of and to continue to make that impact, we have to take care of ourselves first. And once you do that, you can continue to advance the work of human resources. So don't forget to keep the human in human resources. Again, Chris, Nikki, Stephen, with gratitude. And everyone, we'll see you next week on Alchemizing HR, Navigating What's Next. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.